Before we dive into the dark and fascinating work of organized crime, take a moment to hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more captivating stories like this one. Whether it involves money laundering, drug trafficking, intimidation, or assassination, the allure of wealth has long driven individuals to engage in illicit activities. This gives rise to the troubling reality of organized crime, a phenomenon that affects developed societies around the globe. Welcome to our brand new series, where we'll explore the history of the world's most infamous criminal empires. Together, we'll delve into the origin stories of iconic syndicates from various regions, uncovering shadowy pasts that often stretch back centuries. So sit back and prepare to discover the underbelly of society as we reveal the historical roots of today's organized crime, beginning with the Sicilian Mafia. The Sicilian Mafia, known among its members as Cosa Nostra, a term meaning or thing, is a nostrous confederation of criminal syndicates. They are widely recognized for their heavy-handed involvement in protection rackets, alcohol and drug trafficking, and various other organized illegal activities throughout Italy, the United States, and beyond. These Italian gangsters have been immortalized in iconic 20th century literature and film, which often depict them as a zenith of their power during the 1950s. However, the earliest origin of the mafia, a history that stretches back a century prior to the eras illustrated in The Godfather and Goodfellas, are seldom explored. In 1972, Italian journalist Luigi Berzini remarked on Italy's southernmost island. The reason why Sicily is ungovernable is that the inhabitants have long learned to distrust and neutralize all written laws and to govern themselves in their own rough, homemade fashion, as if official illustrations did not exist. This arrangement is highly unsatisfactory, as it cures no ills, promotes injustice and tyranny, leaves crimes unpunished, does not utilize the Sicilian best qualities, and has kept the country stagnant and backwards in almost every respect. From ancient times, Sicilian history has been characterized by foreign domination. Greeks, Carthaginians, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Vikings, Normans, Germans, and Spaniards have all claimed control over the island at various points. By the dawn of the 19th century, Sicily was ruled by the ancestrally French Bourbon kings, who persisted over the islands as well as much of southern mainland Italy. Most of Sicily's previous dynasties had implemented a form of feudal governance, and the Bourbons were no exception. Under their reign, Sicilian land was held exclusively by either the Catholic Church or feudal barons, who possessed vast states while compromising a tiny fraction of the population. However, by the year 1812, this began to shift. Primogeniture, the law dictating that a noble domain is passed down to his firstborn son, was abolished, prompting the barons of Sicily to gradually sell off portions of the land to the peasantry. Before long, over 1/5 of Sicilian lands came to be owned by private citizens. This gradual transition from feudalism to capitalism was accelerated in 1860 when the intrepid Italian general Giuseppe Garibaldi led a volunteer force of 1,000 men into Sicily, engaging in a bloody war of liberation that culminated in the island's annexation into the bargaining kingdom of Italy. Disdainful of the old order, the Italian kingdom sought to establish itself as a modern nation-state. Consequently, much of the land that remained in the possession of the church or the nobility was confiscated and redistributed among the peasantry. In Sicily, the number of landowners increased tenfold, from 2,000 to 20,000. Most of these new holdings comprised small farms, grazing lands, lemon groves, or vineyards. This represented a monumental societal shift. Before Italy's modernization, most barons with extensive feudal landholdings possessed the resources and manpower to ensure their properties remained secure. The same was true for the immensely wealthy and influential Catholic clergy. However, this was not the case for the small, peasant-owned states that now constituted the majority of Sicilian land. Many Sicilians resisted the imposition of Italian rule and laws, taking up arms in populist uprisings that raged from 1860 to 1876. The violent upheaval stemming from this conflict further destabilized the region, and the poverty induced by war drove many desperate and starving peasants to steal from Sicily's new landowners. Unlike the former feudal barons who could afford their own protection, these small landowners relied on federal soldiers and policemen to safeguard their properties, neither of whom could effectively monitor private plots amidst widespread political unrest across the island. The situation was dire, as the Italian government had distributed land to tens of thousands of middle-class peasants, but left them utterly defenseless in terms of security. For anyone with a keen businessman acumen and a tolerance for violence, late 19th century Sicily was a veritable paradise for exploitation. And that is precisely what unfolded. In the absence of law enforcement, the island's landowners found themselves compelled to turn to private thugs for protection. These loose gangs of hired gunmen quickly realized they were the only real authority in the region, exploiting the situation by turning against the very people they were meant to protect, coercing many local farmers into their clientele under the threat of violence. Landowners had no choice but to employ these contractors. They either paid a handsome sum for the protection of their estates or faced dire and violent consequences. Anton Bloch, an anthropologist who studies the gangs of Italy, defined the central characteristics of the mafia as the private use of unlicensed violence as a means of control in the public arena. From the 1860s onward, this phenomenon would become the primary method by which the Sicilian people were governed. Due to inherently clandestine nature of organized crime, quantifying the scope and the influence of the various factions of Cosa Nostra is difficult. Nevertheless, it is safe to assert that by 1865 they had amassed considerable power in Sicily, controlling much of its farms and ranches, particularly in the western regions surrounding Palermo. Consequently, accounts of their machination during this period have been well documented. The extent of the mafia's reach is first mentioned in a book published in 1864, plainly titled Public Safety in Sicily, authored by Niccolò Taurici Colonna. However, the publication never specifically employed the term mafia, instead referring to a sect of thieves that had ties across the entire island. Colonna was an Italian patriot and a staunch unionist, the type of man who brought the law and order that criminals despised. He had narrowly escaped an assassination attempt a year earlier, when 5 armed hitmen tried to gun him down with muskets while he was traveling down a rural road outside Palermo in a carriage. Fortunately, his guards managed to fend off the attackers with their pistols, forcing them to flee. This brush with death motivated Colonna to raise awareness about Sicily's bargaining underground criminal lords. Colonna's book highlighted many of the mafia's sinister powers, the sect of thieves. He described what was said to harbor no fear of policemen, whom they could easily evade. They exhibited no trepidation toward the courts either, owing to their ability to intimidate witnesses into silence. Colonna's testimony grows even more grim, as he claimed that any civilian caught approaching a military policeman would face execution. This practice enforced a disconnect between lawmen and citizenry, born of fear, establishing a law known as humility, by which the mafia coerced total devotion and respect from the peasantry they ruled. Far from being mere extortionists, Cosa Nostra had evolved into a dangerous cult, deeply embedded in every aspect of Sicilian society. Mafiosi were particularly prominent among the owners of lemon groves, introduced by the Arabs in the 19th century. Lemons quickly became a valued Sicilian export, and by the 19th century, they represented the island's most lucrative cash crop. For instance, by 1855, over 2.5 million crates of Sicilian citrus were shipped to New York annually. However, lemons are fickle crop, but even slight alterations in soil, acidity capable of sabotaging an entire field. This vulnerability makes them especially susceptible to mafia threats, making them doubly lucrative for mafia ownership. A pivotal example of this is the story of Dr. Gaspar Galati, a former surgeon who in 1874 inherited a 4-hectare lemon grove known as Fondoriella. The land was a short distance from his home in Palermo, and like many landowners in Sicily, he soon fell victim to extortion. A group of thugs approached him, claiming they were owed a significant sum of money for protection. Galati insisted he did not require their assistance, dismissing their claims and stating he would report them to the authorities. The following day, Galati awoke to discover that the majority of his lemon trees had been uprooted. When he reported this to the police, he received no assistance. As the months rolled on, the extortion continued, and the gang persisted in harassing him with threats of violence. Ultimately, he was forced to pay for the very protection he had initially resisted, effectively illustrating the power of the mafia. By the late 19th century, Cosa Nostra's influence had penetrated local government and society to such an extent that the upper echelons of Sicilian society began to associate with the criminal syndicate. Many of these elites were complicit in the mafia's corruption, facilitating illicit contracts or leveraging their own political power for protection. This corruption was crucial to the mafia's survival and enabled it to thrive as a legitimate business under the table, while instilling a fear of violence among those who opposed them. The early 20th century ushered in further socio-political changes to the island. As a result of World War I, Sicily experienced significant population growth and rising unemployment. Meanwhile, the economic strain of the conflict had placed immense pressure on many local governments. The resultant unrest among the peasantry often erupted into protests, and the mafia was well positioned to capitalize on the ensuing violence. To this day, the Sicilian Mafia remains a force to be reckoned with, albeit under different circumstances. Today, Cosa Nostra is engaged in drug trafficking, extortion, and human trafficking on a global scale, with operatives extending their reach into numerous countries. As we conclude our exploration of the origins of the Sicilian Mafia, we observe how it has evolved over the past century and a half. Far from being merely a band of thieves, Cosa Nostra has transformed into an influential criminal organization capable of altering entire regions and societies, leaving behind an undeniable legacy of fear and power. As we reflect on the history of this infamous organization, we invite you to consider the impact of crime and corruption on our own society. What lessons can we learn from the rise of the Sicilian Mafia, and how can we combat similar forces in our own time? Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating content. Thank you for being with us today.